Right now, at this exact moment, someone, somewhere, is collecting your encrypted data. Not to read it today, not to read it next year, but to read it the moment a machine becomes powerful enough to tear open every lock on the internet at once. Your bank records, your private messages, your medical history, the classified intelligence files of nation states, all of it, harvested, stored, waiting. And according to some of the world's top physicists, that machine is closer than anyone expected. Quantum computing just crossed a dangerous threshold. To understand why the world's top security experts are quietly panicking, you first need to understand what a quantum computer actually is and why, for the longest time, most scientists thought building one was practically impossible. Classical computers, the ones in your phone, your laptop, the servers running the internet, work with bits. Each bit is either a 0 or a 1. That's it. Binary. 2 states, simple. A quantum computer uses something called a qubit. And a qubit, thanks to the laws of quantum mechanics, can be both 0 and 1 at the same time, a property called superposition. It can also be entangled with other qubits, meaning the state of one instantly influences the state of another, no matter how far apart they are. The result? A quantum computer doesn't just try one path through a problem, it explores all possible paths simultaneously. For certain types of calculations, the kind that underpin modern encryption, this isn't just faster, it's incomprehensibly faster. Here's how incomprehensible. In December 2024, Google unveiled a chip called Willow, 105 superconducting qubits on a sliver of silicon cooled to near absolute zero. In a benchmark test, Willow completed a calculation in approximately 5 minutes. The same calculation on the fastest classical supercomputer on Earth would take 10 to the power of 25 years. That's not a typo. That's longer than the current age of the universe. By a factor so large, it doesn't have a common name. But that benchmark test was, in a very real sense, beside the point. The real breakthrough, the one that sent shockwaves through the cryptography community, was something else entirely. For decades, the fundamental problem with quantum computers wasn't power. It was fragility. Qubits are extraordinarily sensitive. The faintest vibration, the slightest electromagnetic interference, even cosmic rays from space, any of it can flip a qubit from the wrong state. In quantum computing, this is called decoherence, and it causes errors. The standard solution, in theory, is to group multiple physical qubits together to form a single logical qubit, one with built-in error correction, like a self-repairing system. But here's the cruel irony that stymied quantum computing for 30 years. Every time you added more physical qubits to improve error correction, you also introduced more errors than you corrected. More qubits, more errors. A vicious cycle with no exit. Until Willow. What Google demonstrated with its 105 qubit chip was something researchers had been theorizing about and desperately hoping for since the 1990s. They called it going below threshold. As Google scaled its encoded qubit grid from a 3x3 arrangement to a 5x5 to a 7x7, something remarkable happened. Instead of accumulating errors, the system reduced them exponentially. The larger the grid, the better the error correction performed. For the first time in history, adding more qubits made the machine more reliable, not less. This is the moment the field changed. Crossing below threshold doesn't mean quantum computers are ready to break the internet tomorrow, but it means, for the first time with rigorous experimental proof, that there is now a clear, scalable path to building a fault-tolerant quantum computer, one powerful enough to run any algorithm, one powerful enough to crack encryption. And the race to reach that finish line is now operating at a speed that has surprised even the people running it. If you want to understand where quantum computing is right now, in the middle of 2026, you need to look at 3 companies and what they've announced in just the past 18 months. Google fired the starting gun with Willow in December 2024, but they didn't stop there. By March 2026, Google's quantum AI team published a white paper that landed like a bomb in the cybersecurity world. More on that in a moment. IBM unveiled its Nighthawk processor in November 2025, a 120 qubit chip capable of executing circuits with 30% more complexity than its previous generation, supporting up to 5,000 2-qubit gate operations, the fundamental building blocks of quantum computation. IBM's publicly stated roadmap calls for quantum advantage, the moment a quantum computer demonstrably outperforms all classical methods on a real-world problem by the end of 2026, and fault-tolerant quantum computing by 2029. But IBM didn't just announce hardware. They announced something just as significant, IBM Quantum Loon, an experimental processor that, for the first time, demonstrated all the key components needed for fault-tolerant quantum computing in a single system. And crucially, their real-time classical error decoding was achieved in under 480 nanoseconds, a full year ahead of schedule. Microsoft took a different approach entirely. In February 2025, they introduced a chip called Majorana 1, built on a completely novel topological qubit architecture. Rather than fighting decoherence like everyone else, Microsoft's design attempts to make qubits fundamentally more stable by encoding information in exotic quantum states that are naturally resistant to interference. The ambition? Scale to 1 million qubits on a single device. The engineering challenges remain enormous, but if it works, it would leapfrog every other architecture in existence. And it's not just the technology giants. By late 2025, enterprise clients, JP Chase, BMW, Amgen, SoftBank, were already running early quantum workloads on real systems. HSBC used IBM's quantum hardware to improve bond trading prediction accuracy, what many analysts described as the first documented quantum-enabled edge in algorithmic trading. By early 2026, the global quantum computing market had reached somewhere between $1.08 and $3, $5 billion, with some projections calling for $20 billion by 2030. Research papers on quantum error correction alone tripled from 36 in 2024 to over 120 in 2025. The hype cycle is over. This is now engineering, and the engineering is working. Here is where this story changes from one about brilliant science to one about genuine civilization-scale danger. Everything you do online, every purchase, every login, every email, every bank transfer, is protected by encryption, specifically by a type of encryption called public key cryptography. And at the heart of most public key cryptography is a simple mathematical fact. It is trivially easy to multiply two large prime numbers together, but impossibly hard to reverse the operation and figure out which two primes you multiplied. RSA encryption, used by banks, governments, hospitals, and virtually every secure website on the planet, relies on this asymmetry. Factoring a 2048-bit RSA key with a classical computer would take longer than the heat death of the universe. In 1994, a mathematician named Peter Shor published an algorithm showing that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could factor large prime numbers, exponentially faster than any classical machine. Not a little faster, not 10 times faster, exponentially faster. For 30 years, this was a theoretical curiosity, because building a quantum computer with enough stable qubits to run Shor's algorithm at scale seemed impossibly distant. Experts estimated you'd need millions of physical qubits, far beyond anything anyone could build. Then came 2026, and 3 papers published within weeks of each other rewrote the threat timeline. Craig Gidney of Google Quantum AI published a paper demonstrating that a quantum computer with fewer than 1 million noisy physical qubits could factor a 2048-bit RSA integer, the encryption standard protecting most internet banking, email, and digital certificates, in less than a week. Then, in March 2026, a collaboration between Google and researchers at Caltech, Berkeley, and a startup called Oratomic published something even more alarming. They showed that Shor's algorithm could potentially be run with as few as 10,000 to 20,000 atomic qubits. One proposed design, using around 26,000 qubits, could crack Bitcoin's elliptic curve encryption in a matter of days. And perhaps most dramatically, a separate algorithm announced by the Advanced Quantum Technologies Institute in March 2026, called the JVG algorithm, claimed to require a 1,000-fold reduction in quantum resources compared to Shor's algorithm, potentially needing fewer than 5,000 qubits to break RSA. Let's put those numbers in context. IBM's Nighthawk chip today has 120 qubits. IBM's roadmap calls for processors exceeding 1,000 qubits by 2028. Google, Fujitsu, and others are on similar trajectories. We are not talking about a threat that arrives in 50 years. We are talking about a threat that, by some estimates, could arrive before the end of this decade. Dominic Westerbaum, a researcher tracking quantum threats, put it bluntly. Almost every system in the world becomes vulnerable altogether to a quantum attacker. And Blivstein, a physicist who recently co-founded quantum computing startup Oratomic, told Time magazine, "People in the know will be like, oh, it's coming. The world is currently, in my view, not prepared." Here's the part of this story that most people don't know, and that keeps security professionals awake at night. You don't need a quantum computer today to benefit from quantum computing tomorrow. The attack has a name: harvest now, decrypt later. The strategy is exactly what it sounds like. State-level actors and sophisticated criminal organizations are right now collecting and storing encrypted communications, classified government intelligence, corporate secrets, personal financial data, diplomatic cables, with the explicit intention of decrypting it the moment quantum computers become capable enough. Think about what that means. A diplomatic cable sent today, protected with RSA encryption, might be mathematically unbreakable in 2026. But if a foreign intelligence service records that encrypted traffic and stores it, and quantum computers reach sufficient capability in 2032, the cable becomes completely readable, retroactively, Every secret you've ever sent over the internet, every private medical record, every corporate acquisition plan, every encrypted communication between governments, all of it potentially sitting in someone's quantum-ready data vault, waiting. This isn't paranoia. This is the explicit assessment of the U.S. National Security Agency, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and intelligence agencies across the world. The NSA has already issued updated cryptographic guidance. NIST has set a deadline. Classical public key cryptography should be deprecated by 2030 and fully disallowed by 2035. Google, recognizing that its own researchers are the ones defining the threat timeline, set an internal deadline to secure its systems by 2029, 6 years ahead of NIST's recommendation. Cloudflare, the company that routes a significant fraction of all internet traffic, moved its post-quantum security target forward in April 2026, citing the recent research breakthroughs. As of mid-2026, over two-thirds of browser traffic to Cloudflare's network is already protected with post-quantum encryption. The transition has begun, but for the vast majority of the world's digital infrastructure, it hasn't. If the picture wasn't complicated enough, there's another variable that most mainstream coverage hasn't caught up to yet. Artificial intelligence is accelerating quantum computing research. The same revolution in AI that has transformed every other field of science is now being pointed directly at quantum physics. Researchers are using large language models, neural networks, and AI-driven discovery pipelines to find new quantum error correction schemes, optimize qubit architectures, and discover more efficient algorithms for attacking encryption. The Atomic team, whose March 2026 paper dramatically lowered the qubit threshold for breaking encryption, confirmed they used AI as a key tool in deriving their results. One researcher described telling a colleague at Google's quantum initiative that he'd been seeing lots of crazy results using AI-driven discovery. Within weeks, Google posted job listings for quantum researchers, specifically to develop AI-based discovery pipelines. A 2025 survey of quantum experts found a 39% probability of quantum computers capable of breaking internet encryption arriving within the next decade. That estimate was made before the AI acceleration became fully apparent. Many researchers believe the real timeline is now shorter. This creates a race between two timelines: how fast quantum computers reach the cryptographically relevant threshold, and how fast the world migrates to post-quantum cryptography. Right now, the migration is winning, barely, but only in the most advanced organizations. For most of the world's digital infrastructure, the migration hasn't meaningfully started. The good news, and there is good news, is that the mathematical solution to this problem already exists. Post-quantum cryptography, or PQC, refers to a new generation of encryption algorithms based on mathematical problems that quantum computers cannot solve efficiently. Not factoring large primes, not discrete logarithms. Problems involving lattices, hash functions, and other structures that remain hard even for quantum machines. In August 2024, NIST finalized the first 3 post-quantum cryptographic standards. Years of work by mathematicians around the world, specifically designed to replace RSA and elliptic curve cryptography before the quantum threat arrives. In March 2025, a 4th algorithm was added to the approved list. The transition is already underway at the leading edge. The Transport Layer Security Protocol, TLS, the HTTPS padlock you see in your browser, is being updated to support post-quantum key exchange. Modern deployments are increasingly using hybrid approaches that combine classical encryption with post-quantum algorithms, meaning an attacker would need to break both simultaneously. But cryptographic infrastructure has a long tail: banking systems, government networks, medical records, power grid controls, industrial equipment, legacy systems running on hardware that may not be updated for another decade. The challenge isn't theoretical, it's logistical. Security researchers recommend what they call crypto agility, designing systems so that cryptographic components can be swapped out without rebuilding everything from scratch. The organizations taking this seriously today are the ones that won't be catastrophically exposed tomorrow. The ones that aren't, they are accumulating risk with every passing month. Quantum computing is not just a technological race, it's a geopolitical one, and arguably the most consequential technology competition of the 21st century. The nation that achieves fault-tolerant quantum computing first doesn't just gain a scientific advantage. It gains the ability to decrypt the communications of every adversary that hasn't yet migrated to post-quantum cryptography. It gains unbreakable quantum communication channels of its own. It gains the computational power to model molecular interactions for new weapons, materials, and pharmaceuticals at a scale no rival can match. The United States has recognized the stakes. The NSA, DARPA, and the Department of Energy are all running major quantum programs. Atom Computing's neutral atom quantum platform has attracted significant DARPA funding. The broader quantum computing market has drawn record private investment, hundreds of millions flowing into startups, with several pursuing public offerings. China has invested tens of billions in quantum technology, operating its own national quantum laboratory, and publishing a growing volume of research on both quantum hardware and quantum cryptanalysis. European nations have pooled resources through the European Quantum Flagship, a €1 billion initiative. The UK, Singapore, Australia, every technologically advanced nation is now running a quantum strategy. The United Nations declared 2025 the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. That gesture was symbolic, but the underlying message was not. Nations that fail to develop quantum capability and fail to secure their cryptographic infrastructure will find themselves in an asymmetric position that may be impossible to recover from. We are not at that inflection point yet. But multiple credible estimates now place it within 10 years. Some place it within 5. All of this might feel abstract. Qubits and logical error rates and post-quantum cryptography standards. It sounds like it belongs in a physics seminar, not in a conversation about your daily life. But consider what encryption protects today. Your banking credentials, your healthcare records, your personal messages, your identity documents stored in government databases, your company's proprietary research, the financial systems that underpin the global economy, the power grid, air traffic control, nuclear command and control. All of it secured by mathematical locks that quantum computers are right now on a credible trajectory to pick. The question isn't whether this threat is real. The consensus among physicists, cryptographers, and intelligence professionals is that it is. The question is whether the migration to quantum-resistant security happens fast enough, and whether the political will, the engineering resources, and the institutional awareness exist to make it happen in time. For most individuals, the practical action is limited. You cannot personally upgrade the RSA encryption used by your bank. What you can do is be aware of where you are most exposed, especially if you handle sensitive information professionally, and push the organizations you interact with to have a post-quantum migration plan. For organizations, the time to act is not when quantum computers arrive. It's now. They'll harvest now, decrypt later. Threat means that data being sent today is already at risk of future exposure. Every year of delay narrows the window. For policymakers, this is a critical infrastructure problem on the scale of updating the power grid or securing the water supply. It requires mandatory timelines, public investment, and international coordination. There is something important to say here, something that risks getting lost in the legitimate urgency of the security threat. Quantum computing is not just a weapon. It is one of the most powerful scientific tools in human history. The same computational power that threatens encryption could, in the right hands, simulate the behavior of molecules with a precision that is impossible for classical computers. This means accelerating drug discovery, modeling protein folding, identifying cancer treatments, designing new antibiotics in a world of growing bacterial resistance, at a pace that could save millions of lives. In November 2025, Quantinuum used its trapped ion quantum computer to simulate the Fermi-Hubbard model, a foundational problem in physics, directly relevant to understanding high-temperature superconductors. Room-temperature superconductors, if achieved, would revolutionize energy transmission, eliminate waste in the electrical grid, and potentially transform clean energy on a planetary scale. Quantum computers could optimize global logistics and supply chains with an efficiency that classical algorithms can't approach. They could model climate systems with unprecedented resolution. They could redesign materials from the atomic level up, lighter aircraft, stronger building materials, more efficient batteries. IonQ, in early 2025, ran a medical device simulation on its 36-qubit quantum computer and outperformed classical high-performance computing by 12%, a modest number, but a real one. The first confirmed quantum advantage over classical methods on a practical, real-world task. This is the technology that, within our lifetimes, could collapse the timeline for curing diseases from decades to years. That could solve optimization problems that currently consume enormous amounts of energy and time. That could help us understand the quantum mechanics of photosynthesis and use that knowledge to build solar cells an order of magnitude more efficient than any we have today. The threshold we've crossed isn't just a dangerous one, it's a threshold into a world where some of the hardest problems our civilization faces become, for the first time, tractable. Here is where we stand in the middle of 2026. We have crossed the threshold of below-threshold quantum error correction, a milestone 30 years in the making. We are on a credible, hardware-backed trajectory toward fault-tolerant quantum computing within 5 to 10 years. 3 separate research groups have published results in 2026 alone, suggesting that the qubit count needed to break the encryption protecting the internet may be 20, 50, or even 100 times lower than previously believed. State-level actors are almost certainly already executing harvest. Now decrypt later strategies against targets they consider valuable. And the world's digital infrastructure, the backbone of the global economy, of democratic institutions, of critical services, has barely begun the migration to quantum-resistant security. But here's the other thing that is also true. Humanity has faced technological thresholds before: nuclear weapons, the internet, artificial intelligence. In each case, the technology arrived before the governance did. In each case, the consequences range from transformative to catastrophic, depending almost entirely on the choices made in the critical window between arrival and preparation. We are in that window now with quantum computing. The math is done. The physics has proven what was once theoretical. The engineering is advancing on a timeline that is measured in years, not decades. The only question left, the one that will determine whether crossing this threshold becomes a story of catastrophic exposure or extraordinary human progress, is whether the people, institutions, and governments who need to act will act in time. The machine that shouldn't have existed exists. The threshold that shouldn't have been crossed this soon has been crossed. What happens next is up to us. If you want to understand more about post-quantum cryptography and what organizations can do right now to prepare, the links below include NIST's official post-quantum migration guidelines, Cloudflare's technical overview of the transition, and the full text of the Google and Oratomic research papers discussed in this video. If this video gave you something to think about, share it. The people who need to understand this threat most urgently are not quantum physicists. They're the executives, policymakers, and engineers making infrastructure decisions that will determine how exposed we are when Q-Day arrives. Subscribe, because the next chapter of this story is going to move fast.